Hey, welcome to Secular. We are taking your calls in an issue that should not be partisan at all. How we combat child sex trafficking in the United States of America, specifically in the hotbeds of trafficking. Well, in California, which is a Democrat-run state, but there are a lot of Republicans in the state legislature there. It's a big state, very diverse. Put forward bipartisan legislation that would turn child trafficking of teenagers and children younger than 18 and make it a serious felony on par with arson, and rape, which would bring longer prison terms and potential life sentences without a chance for a plea bargain. So kind of the three strikes and you're out when it comes to these 25 to life sentences. And yet, a handful of Democrats in the California legislature blocked this move, now protecting child traffickers from more severe sentences by saying that putting them in prison doesn't stop anything. Now, I know there's been debates about, the war on drugs, and does that actually keep people off drugs, or they just start using drugs when they're in prison and when they're out of prison. But there is a way to stop child trafficking. Get the traffickers off the street. Make sure they know that the punishment is going to be so severe that they will spend the rest of their life potentially in prison without the potential for parole. And even with Gavin Newsom's support out of California, I want you to listen to the Assembly Majority Leader, Isaac Bryan, a Democrat, talk about why they are not supporting this move. It is disgusting, folks. I want to hear from you. 1-800-684-3110. Protecting the traffickers while, again, allowing these minor children to be sex trafficked and knowing that the people in charge of it are not going to face the same kind of serious legal penalties that someone who committed a serious crime. It's not considered a serious crime in California right now. Take a listen.
All evidence has shown that longer sentences don't actually stop things from happening. All they do is increase our investment in systems of harm and subjugation at the expense of the investments that the communities needed to not have this be a problem to begin with.
I get that on some of these issues where we think that we have too many people in prison in the United States for too many low-level felonies.
Sure.
This shouldn't be a low-level felony. So what he's not telling you the truth there, the assemblyman, is that this legislation, Logan, took this from being a regular crime, which is still a serious crime, but then would again elevate it to being a serious crime. And then if it's considered a serious crime, you can make these penalties that are much more severe. And we're not talking about recidivism here. We're talking about literally your three strikes, you're out, and you're spending the rest of life in prison. So that trafficker would be off the streets for good. Yeah. That's different than a drug user or a drug dealer getting in and out of prison multiple times.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you hear these you can't even believe that these laws are being passed, that this is happening, or they're not being passed. They're being overturned. And it's not shocking out of the state of California, but when this topic is sort of the number one topic right now that people are discussing this week, to have something like this happen, it's just heartbreaking. It's sad. So I think we have to always get engaged in these issues and figure out ways that we can get involved.
Child sex trafficking, pretty common sense, should be considered a serious felony. Right now, in the state of California, they block that move. It is not considered a serious felony. But Gavin Newsom might step in, because this should be a bipartisan issue, that we're all so disgusted by these traffickers that we want to put them away behind bars for life. That's what they deserve. I don't give Democrats a lot of credit most of the time, but I will. And listen, a lot of the reason why this California law did not pass is because of a handful of Democrats on a committee who were opposed to ever extending longer prison sentences. They don't care what it's for. They think that putting people in prison for long term is just bad policy. But we've got Gavin Newsom and probably the majority of the Democrats in the state legislature who were willing to vote for this in a bipartisan show of support for those who have been trafficked so that we can go after the traffickers. In the state, let me give you some facts. This is in the legislation, just so you know about how serious what we're talking about here. And the legislation was very simple. It was a Senate bill, an act to amend sections of the penal code, and as amended to use the term serious felonies for human trafficking of a minor with the definition of a serious felony for all purposes, including for purposes of the three-strike law, By expanding the scope of an enhancement, this bill would impose a state-mandated local program. It's SB 14, serious felonies, human trafficking. This is why California says they need to enact this. The legislature finds and declares all of the following. A, California consistently ranks number 1 in the nation in the number of human trafficking cases that are reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The cases that they actually know about, they're ranked number 1. The California Attorney General notes that California is one of the largest sites for human trafficking in the United States and recognizes the serious nature of the crime. Human trafficking is among the world's fastest growing criminal enterprise and is estimated to be a $150 billion a year global industry. $150 billion a year global industry. And you would think these Democrats would want to protect minorities within in our country who are specifically being targeted. For instance, letter D, Native American women and girls are victims of human trafficking at a much higher rate compared to the overall population. California has the 6th highest death rate of indigenous women in urban cities. And again, it was chosen, California, as the first pilot location for the U.S. DOJ Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Initiative. So they had all the facts and all the reasons, Andy, to say, we need to update our law. And most of the Democrats, I'll give Gavin Newsom credit again. He's going to go back to work on this because I think he realizes how bad this looks for Democrats in the states. And it was a handful of Democrats who didn't want to do this because they're totally opposed, Andy, to this idea of tough prison sentences. They want those all thrown out. They don't care if it's trafficking, murder, drug crimes. Their ideology is that long prison sentences, even life in prison sentences, somehow won't impact human trafficking. But in this case, which I see is different than the drug dealer who might get out a few times, if you put a major trafficker away for life, that is impacting people's lives.
Substantially, Jordan, and I have put major traffickers away for life in the prosecutions that I've done in state courts as an assistant district attorney for many years, and it is the major trafficker that needs to be put away. The aim of the Democrats here is to empty the prisons. We just want to empty the prisons because the prisons are places of harm and subjugation. Well, of course they're places of subjugation, and they're not intended to be pleasant places, but they're intended to be places where people who cannot comport to the norms of society are put. The Senate Bill 14 in California, which was defeated by most of the Democrats' votes the other day, would classify trafficking of children and teenagers younger than 18 as a serious felony. In other words, it would raise it on a par with murder, arson, and rape, and would bring long prison terms and potential life sentences without a chance for plea bargaining. Plea bargaining is where you promise a lesser crime if someone will plead to that in exchange for a greater crime. That is done away with. You serve the crime that you plead to or that you're convicted of, and you go away.
You want to go to the calls?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a call. Can we go to Mary Ellen on line 1? Yeah, let's just go to Mary Ellen.
Thank
Mary,
you.
You're on the air.
Yeah, I have more questions. It's like, what money group is supporting these politicians that are not agreeing with that new bill? It's like we know China, we know the movie industry in California, that's big, and we know that this is an erosion to our social fabric in this nation, the moral ethics. It's taken this nation down, and I mean, we also know they're bringing them in from the southern border, and China's involved in some of that. So, who's behind this?
Yeah, well, I mean, these are very liberal Democrats on this committee. It already passed the state Senate. So this is just at the California Assembly, their version of like a state house. So the state Senate with a lot of Democrats passed this. This is a handful of radical Democrats on this committee who are against basically incarceration. They believe that, again, we have overly incarcerated in the United States. And listen, I think there are some crimes we probably have. But this one, when it comes to human trafficking, I think you can separate that from all the other debates and say an individual or cartel or organized crime unit that would take teenage children away from their families and traffic them so that they can sell them for sex acts should be punished as serious felonies. In California right now, that definition of serious felonies, Andy, does not apply to a sex trafficker.
No, it doesn't, and it ought to. And this bill would have made it that. It would have brought it on a par with, as it says, murder, arson, and rape, all offenses that carry with it, in some instances, capital punishment in the case of murders of some kinds approved by the Supreme Court of the United States for execution. But it would do what it ought to do, and that is take trafficking of minors and make it serious crimes, not subject to plea bargaining away to lesser offenses. It would bring them in line with the serious felonies that they really are. And the fact that it fills up jails, and I don't know that it necessarily does, because the judge is bound by what the legislature said is the penalty, is the price that you pay. You get them off the streets.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do.
Yeah, and you disincentivize the larger organized crime units from wanting to get involved in this business because they know if they ultimately get caught or extradited from the countries of even the leadership, that they're going to face life in prison like they would for other serious crimes. Take a listen to State Senator Shannon Grove out of California.
So right now in the state of California, trafficking a minor child for sex is not considered a serious felony. Arson is, bank robbery is, carjacking.
I mean, Logan, that's where I think this is absurd. You know, if carjacking is a serious felony, which it should be, it's dangerous. Bank robbery, very dangerous. Taking kids from their families that are minors and selling them into sex is worse than either of those, to me. Is worse than bank robbery or carjacking.
Yeah, here's just the truth.
And yet it does not meet the same. If you were in court today as one of those traffickers, you would not be facing the same kind of potential punishment as someone who committed a bank robbery.
Yeah, and the truth is the media and really social media and everything will suppress these kind of stories. I can tell you right now, I'm looking at you right now if you're watching on social media right now. Other than Rumble, right now on our major platforms, we're having a significantly less view count because notifications didn't go out because of our title, because of things that happened, because they don't want you to hear this kind of information, whether that is on some of the other social platforms, wherever you are. If you look at the view count, be like, oh, I wonder why half the amount of people are watching right now, because this information gets suppressed.
Well, but this goes into the theories that I don't like conspiracy theories, but that Logan,
It's not a conspiracy. I mean, I can tell you with almost certainty.
No. What I'm saying is that builds into the theories that there is this group trying to protect these traffickers.
Yeah.
That whether it's Hollywood or this kind of weird Epstein world that we saw developed with business leaders and stuff, that somehow they think they're above the law and they can treat human beings however they want, even if they're children. And they don't want you to focus on it, because every time you do focus on it, people want to know, why did you fly to Epstein's Island? And what did you see there? And we've never gotten answers about that.
Yeah, of course, when there are, and that plays a part into the movie and to Sound of Freedom, and that's part of why people are on the left and people are concerned that they're saying that this is some sort of, it's just overblown conspiracy. But when you have these moments, they're playing into it. Yep. If you want to be concerned why people are feeling like maybe you think they're stretching the truth, well, when you have moments like this, where we're going, well, sex traffickers,
they're not serious.
They don't need to go to jail forever. Well, then people go, wake up.
Yeah, and the serious legislation here, folks, I mean, it found as fact that of all the states in the country, California ranks number one. It's a real problem there. Most Democrats in the state agreed. It was a handful of far-left Democrats who have prevented this from moving forward in the state Senate to get to Governor Newsom's desk. I will say, Governor Newsom, in this act, because I think it's just a human act. Anybody who's got kids, family, you want these sex traffickers punished to the full extent of the law, has pledged to do something to get this to his desk, to work on it. So at least he's not backing away. Let's keep the pressure up on the Democrats who are doing the right thing on this issue, because it should not be partisan at all. As we said, they know they rank as the worst state in the country. Support the work of the ACLJ. Double the impact to your donation right now. We work on all of these issues. Donate today at aclj.org. Sex trafficking has gotten a lot of new attention, and I think that's a good thing because of the movie A Sound of Freedom, and yet we also have actual legislation moving through, so we're not just talking about it because of the movie's success. There's legislation in California because California, even in the proposed legislation, they say they're the number one state for child sex trafficking. They have the number one problem with it. They see all these different communities that are somewhat disenfranchised being really utilized and kind of, I guess, targeted by these traffickers And so they wanted to pass a law to upgrade the criminal charge for sex trafficking to a serious felony, which then puts in much more serious punishments. And a handful of radical left Democrats in the California State Assembly blocked it from getting a vote. It already passed the Democrat-controlled state Senate in California. Gavin Newsom was prepared to sign it. No one saw this as a partisan issue. I mean, I know people have tried to make the movie like a partisan issue, but not when it's you're the number one state for child sex trafficking. No one wants their state to rank number one on that statistic. It is scary. It is disgusting. It's kind of like the worst of the worst crimes you can commit too, in my opinion. I mean, there's lots of bad crimes that already get the status of serious felony, but not sex trafficking. So that's what we're talking about here. Gavin Newsom has pledged to go back and get this done and keep fighting on it so that this gets raised to a serious felony. But as of right now in California, you commit sex trafficking, you are not committing a serious felony, which means your punishment is going to be much less than someone who carjacked a vehicle or robbed a bank. So you're getting a less penalty for kidnapping children and selling them for sex than a bank robber. Just think about that. You're getting less prison sentence, less time. You're getting probation probabilities. You're not on a 3-strike plan. I mean, the list goes on and on about why elevating this to a 3-strike serious felony is so important. And it's a glimmer of hope that even in a state like California, we can, Logan, get to some common sense legislation that makes sense to protect kids.
Yeah, I don't know why this is even becoming a politicized issue. It's really quite disturbing, as you'd expect. I mean, I guess I can know why. I can kind of put pieces together. But it's just crazy. It's crazy that it always happens when the spotlight is maybe the most on it. Like if this was a few months ago, I feel like maybe this would have kind of floated under the radar. But right now, the issue is on the top of people's minds right now. And for this to happen during it is it's unbelievable. Phone lines are completely jammed right now. Let's go ahead and take one call before we head into the break. Let's go to Kelly, who's in Arizona. Kelly, you're on the air.
Hello, I'm grateful for you taking my call. So the question I have is this. If sex trafficking is pretty much a slap on the wrist for all intents and purposes, and some of these other things, you can't put it on social media, to kind of cry out about it, what can we do? Because, yes, we can complain about it, and I hate it, and it sucks a lot.
No, I see. Okay, so there's two things we got to do, Kelly. We fight the legislations, and we fight the legislation. We've been doing that for 2 decades, the ACLJ, on this issue. The first was changing the law so that the women and girls who are being sex trafficked could go to police, if they could find them, and tell them what was happening to them without fear of being prosecuted as a prostitute. So the sex traffickers would tell them, if you go to police, they're going to put you in jail. You got a kid, they're going to take the kid away from you. So you're going to be the one that goes behind bars, and we're just going to disappear. You're never going to get me. So that was one thing that we got changed. Now we need to change the law. It's a felony in California. I want to make that clear, Kelly, but some felonies only have, 1 year in prison. What they wanted to do was raise this to a serious felony, which is a minimum of 25 years in prison and comes with the 3-strike rule, which means if you get convicted for the 3rd time of child sex trafficking, you're in jail for the rest of your life, no parole. That's what they were trying to do, was elevate it to a serious felony. And yet, a handful of Democrats, these radical Democrats, and this is when you start thinking about they're kind of like radicalizing our kids and pushing sex in front of children, why they're doing that and kind of what is behind that ideology. We know we can win this. We actually have the support of Gavin Newsom. So let's come together and win it.
Let's go to Marcella, who's calling in Texas, who's on hold for about 25 minutes, so we appreciate it. Marcella, you're on the air.
That's okay. Thank you for having me. The curious question I have is, this is literally kidnapping people's children off the street or just, an adult even. So my curious question is, why is it not being prosecuted as a kidnapping federal charge?
Listen, I think that there are parts of that if you arrest a trafficker and you can prove the elements of kidnapping, you could. Well, again here, what we want to make sure is that the crime of sex trafficking itself, it is a standalone serious felony. So where you're not just having to utilize other laws to get that person somehow behind bars for a lesser period of time. But if you can add up, by the way, a kidnapping charge, and on top of that charge, you add a serious offense sex trafficking charge, that person is going away likely for the rest of their life. So what you're trying to do is actually give prosecutors better and stronger laws to actually do something to these sex traffickers that is serious, putting them away for life, getting them off the streets, getting them out of the trafficking game, instead of having to cobble together a bunch of laws that may work and you still may do as part of the charge. There's no excuse for child sex trafficking not to be a serious felony in every state in the country. And right now, the state that has the worst problem with it has rejected classifying it as a serious felony. That's the state of California. The good news is it's not so partisan there. The Democrat governor and many Democrats in the state Senate voted for this the good way. It was a handful of radicals who are against imprisonment, basically, and think that prison doesn't do anything. When you put people away for life, they're going to think twice about whether or not they're going to get into the sex trafficking game, whether they're going to follow in the footsteps of the people who are going to spend the rest of their years behind bars. You want to spend the rest of your years behind bars as a sex trafficker? I wonder how long you survive in a federal prison.
Yeah, I don't think very long. Let's continue on and take some more calls. Let's go to Jim, who's calling in Oregon on line 5. Welcome.
I was calling on the subject of disinformation.
Yep.
We ought to use the term alleged disinformation because disinformation gives the other side too much propagandistic clout.
It's certainly a word that has been politicized, for sure. I think you're right about that.
It's like we can't use it anymore for real disinformation.
Yeah, there's always those terminologies get thrown around that now all of a sudden that word means this party, that word means the other.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's just a very straightforward word.
Yeah.
And yet now I kind of, when I look at it and say, instead of saying disinformation, I should use a different term. And unfortunately, I think you're right, Jim, that we've gotten to a point where people hear disinformation, they think conservatives spreading illegal or false content. And again, this is the games they play with our grammar. It's the games they play with defining terms. And they kind of get it set in your head, whether you even are paying attention closely or not, that when you hear disinformation, it must be the conservatives putting it out and the Biden administration trying to stop it and law enforcement trying to stop it. But the only people doing it has to be, the conservatives and Trump supporters that are involved in disinformation. So I think you're absolutely right. It's become a word that is associated now with like a specific political party.
It's like a progressive glossary of terms that get thrown around there. That's one of them.
They need their own urban dictionary.
I'm sure they have it. I'm sure it exists. I mean, it's true though. They're just words you can't use.
Like the woke dictionary we need.
Yeah, that'd be funny. But
maybe Facebook could put that out for us.
Fake news was created as something against conservatives, and Trump flipped it on them. So,
that's true.
You can always take a word back and flip it back onto them. So
yeah.
Let's go ahead. We got a couple minutes. We'll take some more calls. Give us a call. We'll take more of these. I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-684-3110. For those just tuning in on some of our platforms, welcome to the broadcast. 1-800-684-3110. Let's go to Bob in California, who's watching on Facebook. You're on line 4.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Couple quick points. Number one, how are they not charged with the 290 and becoming a registrant? Number two, if they go to prison, they ain't going to last. I have tons of friends in the system that are officers, and you charge those people and they get in the prison system, they won't go 25 years of life.
Yeah, I think you hear those stories all the time.
Listen, I mean, we saw what happened to Larry Nassar.
We know the criminals.
Even disgusting
in Orlando.
Medical coach for the U.S. women's gymnastics team that was abusing those girls, and he got nearly killed yesterday. Yesterday or 2 days ago?
A few days ago.
Yeah, he was stabbed multiple times.
And they had to give life-saving efforts.
Does anyone feel bad?
Well,
No.
That's the one good thing about the people who are a lot of times in federal prison or in prison. It's like there's
a code.
There's a code. There's a line. And a line is not maybe murder. The line is a lot of times, which should be the line for everyone, by the way, and why we're having a problem with what's going on in California, is sexual abuse of children. So, yeah, you're right. And
if you do that, you deserve what you get. And honestly, people don't shed a tear. And Bob, I don't think any of us shed a tear for these people who do this to children, whatever injuries they take or if their life is threatened, because honestly, this is one of the reasons why I still like the death penalty. Listen, we've got a lot of donors in California. I know it's considered a liberal state, but the ACLJ, we get a lot of support. We appreciate that. We appreciate you in California, too, who are fighting back. Rick Riddell from our team is one of those members, too, of our team who is fighting back to try and save their state. My wife is from California. It's an important state to our family. It's an important state to the ACLJ and to the nation, because kind of like sometimes what they do other states end up enacting because it's such a big state, and they kind of follow suit. So we could get some more liberal states to enact tough laws like this. That would be great to stop this child sex trafficking. Support the work at ACLJ. These are the kind of issues we're working on. Donate today at aclj.org. Double the impact your donation with our matching challenge at aclj.org.